You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy, but more importantly, our guest is Paul Caprio. Look, this is the foremost family values guy in the state of Illinois. What is it? It is familypack.org. Family-pack.org. Family Pack. And so family values, we're talking traditional marriage, we're talking gun owner rights, we're talking pro-life, protecting the unborn, but more importantly, if anything can be more important than that, more importantly, Paul Caprio is in the thick of a revolution, and so are you, because if you, well, you could be watching here in Massachusetts, you may not, but if you were in Illinois, you are in the thick of a revolution on July 13th, 2017. Thick of a revolution. And it's broader. Those things are all important. Paul would say they're extremely important, right, Paul?
I sure would.
And what else did I leave out that you focus on in addition to the so-called family values, social values?
You left out the fact that we have been committed in the past and continue to be committed to a responsible tax policy in Illinois, which we are not getting from the Illinois legislature at the present time.
Responsible tax policy means?
Responsible tax policy means, first of all, major reforms of the Illinois state budget so that we can live within our means here in Illinois. Governor Rauner ran saying very simply, we need major reforms of state government. If the legislature does major reforms, I will consider a modest tax increase to meet them halfway. Unfortunately, the legislature last week went ahead and rammed through a partisan budget, the Mike Madigan budget, which had none of the reforms in it, but had a 32% tax increase, keeping Illinois on the same path to destruction.
Okay, so you've heard that. In addition to all I said, family values, social values, sometimes they just say values, there's the economic side. You know, families, it's important to families in Illinois to have low taxes, Mr. Caprio would say, to have low taxes, low spending on the government side, so these families can get by, can work, can have housing, can have health care, can have some discretionary income, can function as a family. Get it? So there's a connection between the economic side and the family value side. And the revolution that we're talking about today is the revolution that occurred when Governor Rauner woke up and he saw that although he opposed a tax increase unless there were major reforms, he vetoed the tax increase, he vetoed the budget, and you know what? There was an override by the Democrats. And initially 15 Republicans in the State House, then 10, sort of, how do we call it? What's the word you used to describe those 10, Paul?
I've used sellout. I know that some people use Benedict Arnold Republicans.
Yeah, so he's calling them sellouts. Some might say Judas Republicans, because who was Judas?
Judas was one of the apostles who betrayed Christ.
For how much? For what?
20 pieces of silver.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. You see this revolution we're talking about. So you see what's going on. The governor wakes up. He sees there are sellouts within his party, within his state house. In fact, one of them was the floor leader. Who was that?
Steve Anderson.
He was the floor leader, right?
He was the floor
That's
leader.
kind of like the whip for the Republican side, but he was supporting the tax increase for Madigan, supporting the tax increase, and he was sort of Mike Madigan's whip. He was going out and getting others, wasn't he, to vote. Wasn't just opposing the tax increase, wasn't just supporting the tax increase, he was trying to get other Republicans. Right, Paul?
That's correct.
So Rauner saw that, I'm telling this story, and he saw what happened, and he said, out with the old, in with the new. What does that mean, Paul? Out with the old. So who was his chief of staff?
Ronner's past chief of staff was Mr. Goldberg.
He was a Kirky, right? He was a former Kirky.
That's
Lance
correct.
Trover, communications, former Kirky. Then we had some former Leslie Mungerites who were sort of moderate and mild. We might have had some Dole folks around who helped as on his campaign. He just said, we're getting rid of those folks. Did he say that?
I don't know exactly what he said, but.
Did he? Did he get rid of those?
He got rid of his chief of staff.
And the communications guy?
Yeah, and that's what he did.
And who did he bring in?
He brought in Christina Rasmussen, who is the president of the Illinois Policy Institute.
And what's the Illinois Policy Institute, Paul?
It's a conservative / libertarian-oriented think tank that does a lot of good work here in Illinois in terms of examining and making recommendations in terms of fundamental reforms of state government to benefit taxpayers.
But let's get it jazzier, Paul. This is TV, remember? So what are the sexy words to describe the Illinois Policy Institute? What do they use when they describe the kind of think tank they are? What are the one or two words that come to mind, Paul?
I'm not familiar with the word.
Liberty, liberty, Paul, liberty,
Liberty.
free markets. Isn't this something you believe in?
Sure.
You worked for this guy, didn't you? Milton Friedman, Free to Choose?
Well,
Right?
I didn't work for him. We did a fundraiser for him.
You did a
once.
fundraiser. That's
Yeah.
kind of like working for him. You believe in free to choose, right? Free to choose? Okay.
Excellent book.
So you believe in free markets. You believe, Paul, tell me, am I right? Do you believe in liberty?
Of course.
You believe in the U.S. Constitution?
I'm a great defender of the U.S.
Okay, so
Constitution.
Rauner, the governor, goes over to the Illinois Policy Institute and says, give me some of this liberty, give me some of this free market, give me some accountability. We had Ted Dabrowski here, our regular viewers would know. You can find that on youtube.com/publicaffairs.tv. Ted was and is VP Policy at Illinois Policy Institute. He said accountability. You believe in accountability. That's what your organization is about, isn't it?
Sure.
What does that mean? Tell us.
Accountability means keeping your promises and doing what you tell voters that you're going to do.
So is Governor Rauner keeping his promise? What did he promise when he ran in 2014? Do you remember? And is he now going to start keeping them? Because some would say he may not have kept it the first 2 years.
No, I don't agree with that at all.
Really?
I have lived in Illinois since 1971. And what I have seen is a series of governors who have broken their promises both on reform of government and no new taxes pledges.
Could you name any names? Let's be specific.
I'll be glad to.
Give me those guys who broke their promise.
Jim Thompson broke his promise.
He's a Republican.
Jim Edgar broke his
Another
promise.
Republican.
George Ryan, of course, was marred in a scandal.
He went to prison.
However, he broke a lot of his various different promises to voters.
All three Republicans. Okay, three.
So,
What about the Democrats? Did they break any promises or did they keep them?
I don't know that Pat Quinn ever made a promise of no new taxes. I'm not familiar with that if he
Okay.
did.
So maybe he promised to raise taxes, and he did. In a way, you like Pat because Pat did what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to raise taxes in 2010, and he did raise them in 2010, right?
Well, here's what happened 3 years ago to
Okay.
put this all in
We
context.
can't do too much history because remember, this is not a University of Chicago seminar.
I'm going to make this quick. Rauner ran on a promise to substantially reform state government in Illinois. He did say if they did substantial reform, he would be open to the idea of a tax increase. So I don't feel that Rauner has broken any promises. In fact, he's the first governor in a long time who's actually attempted to fulfill his promises. Now, look,
Okay.
when we ask people to make promises, that doesn't always mean they're going to be able to implement everything that they promise. But we expect them at least to try and not go in the opposite direction. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the first governor in a long time, and we have disagreed with him on a number of different issues, especially some social issues. But in terms of his overall promises, after all, the people in this state, in this blue state, did not elect him because he had a pretty flannel shirt on. They didn't elect him because they liked his wife. They didn't elect him for any reason
So
other
why-
than they knew something was seriously wrong with the way state government
Yeah.
was being run.
Why did they elect him? What did they want him to do, Paul?
They wanted to reform state government with no new taxes. And that's exactly what they want today.
What
as we're
reforms would they
sitting here
like?
talking.
Why do they care, Paul? They're busy doing stuff, they're working, they're enjoying life. 13 million people in Illinois, excuse my language, but why the hell do they care what Rauner's doing about reforms? Can't you, they just go about their business, Rauner, Madigan, they do what they want. Really, why do reforms matter, Paul?
Reforms matter because Illinois is on a death spiral of additional bills. Right now, the state has $15 billion sitting there in unpaid bills. I heard the Democratic controller, who is a
What's her name?
Susana Mendoza is her name.
Yeah.
She's an acolyte of Speaker Mike Madigan, and she sings his tune. I heard her last night calling it the Rauner back bills, the $15 billion. Well, see, when Rauner became governor, it's my understanding the unpaid bills were roughly about $8 million.
Billion.
$8 billion, I'm sorry.
And actually, she said, I watched that program too, that's our public TV, WTTW, Chicago Tonight, my good buddy, Paris Schutz, was interviewing her, right? And Paris said, yeah, it's good, she challenged her. She said 15 billion, he said, now come on, those bills can't be just Rauner. Why do you keep calling it, she would say, the Rauner stack of unpaid bills, the Rauner pile of unpaid bills, the Rauner 15 billion. But she conceded. She said, yeah, it was 5 billion, she said. You say 8. Split the difference. What's 3 billion among friends? Okay, so she said it was 5 billion when Rauner came in. She said, let's say the 10 billion, that's on Rauner. Can you argue with that, Paul? Can you argue with that?
I can argue with a lot of what she
Well,
has to say.
assume it's the 10 that we're talking about. Assume it's
Because
the 10.
here's the fact. The fact is, they increased the Illinois state income tax, saying that the reason for the increase was to pay down all the unpaid bills in 2011.
2011.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, so that they passed that tax was then in effect.
And what was the
for-
increase that happened, Paul?
it
Just
went up
remind
to-
people.
It went up to 5%.
From where?
For individuals, from 3.5, I believe.
No, it was 3%. So in
3% to
2011, it
5.
was 3, they went from 3 to
They-
5.
they
It was a
went-
66%
They-
increase.
That's right. So they went to 5%, and then also keep in mind the corporate tax increase went up.
Because they have to stay proportional.
Yeah, it
So when
went-
you
it
increase
went
one,
up
you
to-
increase the
It
other.
went up to almost 8%.
Okay.
So this was supposedly to get all of the unpaid bills paid. So 2 years later, after this tax had been put into place, were the unpaid bills paid? No, they were about the same as they were when they passed the tax increase. So this is the kind of way in which politicians in Springfield have managed the money of the public. And we should also point
Well,
out.
wait a second though, but you skipped over, we're fair. We are fair and balanced. In TTW, I think you folks could learn a lesson
Do
here.
you work for Fox?
No, I don't. Fox is not always fair and balanced. Berkowitz is tough but fair and balanced. How's that? We'll coin a phrase there. Because, Paul, it did increase. The bills went from 5 billion or so, I think the Policy Institute would say this, to 15 billion in 4 years when the tax increase was allowed to sunset, not completely, but it went from 5% to 3.75. So it is true. And Rauner didn't have a budget for 2 years. Or did the state of Illinois? Because Rauner said, unless you give me the reforms, I'm not going to go along with any budget. And Madigan said, you'll destroy the middle class if we give you the reforms. So there was this stalemate. So Susana Mendoza said, look, it's on Rauner because he sort of, she would say this exactly, but others have said it, he held the state hostage for his reforms. He penalized it. He caused this disaster of the last 2 years, chaos without a budget, and a $10 billion increase. And Paris Schutz said, what? He didn't. What would you say?
Well,
if you were there,
what would I say?
if Paris had thought to say, why don't I have Paul Caprio here? Then I would be balanced, and then what Susanna said, and say she said $10 billion, this is on Rauner, what would Paul Caprio say?
Whether it's 5 million or 7 billion,
Billion.
it's a lot of unpaid bills.
Okay, but
That should
why
have
isn't
all
it,
been
the
paid.
short, the question to you, Paul, is why shouldn't we blame Rauner for that $10 billion increase? Because if he had been sort of a normal guy, if he had just said, okay, I can't get my reforms, I'll go along with the budget, maybe I'll get them later. Edgar kind of said he should do that. And if he had done that, we would have had a budget. We probably might have had an increase in unpaid bills, but not to 15 billion, that's for sure.
Well, because.
So why isn't it on Rauner?
Okay, well, it's not on,
That's the
it's
question.
not on Rauner because you're blaming the fact.
Not me, I'm just asking the
that
question.
there was not an accommodation with some of the needed reforms in the budget on Rauner. But the fact of the matter is, what happened was Madigan, without any of the 44 reforms which Governor Rauner proposed, passed a budget, strictly Madigan's. By the way, the state treasurer the other day said, well, now that we passed a budget and a big tax increase, the governor's got to go to New York and talk to Moody's to defend the budget. Well, this is Mike Madigan's budget.
So Mike should be going to New York?
Yeah, Mike Madigan should be going to New
Okay,
York.
wait, can I get my intern here? Jonathan, could you get Speaker Mike on the phone and let me talk to him? Because I got to remind him he's got a trip to New York he's got to do this afternoon. Okay, Jonathan? Jonathan just said okay.
Yeah, and I think Bruce Rauner should pay for his ticket, a round trip, to go to New York, and he can then explain to Moody's why it is that this budget should enhance our bond rating. Now, let me also say this, though, about
Because what's the other problem with the bond rating, other than this deficit, which is a flow item, we know that from the University of Chicago, it's a deficit that occurs yearly, you have more that you're spending that you're receiving, but aside from the deficit, which the Democrats say they've now cured by raising taxes, what other problem might the rating agencies raise, even if they concede that we've solved the budget, which some would dispute? What other problem does the state of Illinois have? In addition to the 15 billion in unpaid bills, do we have some other problem, Paul?
Oh, yeah, we've got contingent liabilities in the pension fund and
Of how much?
other related.
Of how much?
Close to 200 billion at this point.
Some rating agency says 250 billion. Why is that a problem? If you're going to buy a bond in the state of Illinois, okay, why do you care that they may have 250 billion in unfunded liabilities? Why should you care? Just buy the damn bond. You're going to get interest. You're going to get your principal back, aren't you?
Well, a bond is sort of like a loan. So the issue becomes, are they going to be in a financial position down the road to protect the bondholders? Keep in mind,
Because if they can't, they could default, right?
Bond ratings are really evaluated in terms of, can the bondholders be paying off? It's not an issue of the pain that taxpayers are going through. And that's what we really need to talk about. As bad as a 32% tax increase is, Jeff, we also have to understand the huge property taxes in the suburbs especially that are making people leave Illinois in droves, as high a sales tax as there is in the United States. My wife and I...
And the high property tax, the highest in the country, right?
That's correct.
So if you have a high sales tax, a high property tax, and you've just raised the income tax, and if you're somebody in Illinois, you look at not just the income tax, somebody says we're 16th, 20th in income tax, what you really want to know is per capita in Illinois, when you total up all the state and local taxes that people pay, and you rank us, we're probably pushing, I don't know, number 12, would you say, possibly? That's not good. You want to be in this ranking in the bottom. We're near the top. And so you got to look at the property tax, I mean, and we've just pushed up the income tax and the sales tax. That's your point. People care about this stuff.
And the gasoline tax, and we could go on and on and on.
Okay.
And so what this means is, when we are competing with states, some of which have both right to work, Indiana doesn't even have a state income tax. When people look at the comparison, they say taxes in this state are too much. I can't afford it. We have to look elsewhere in terms of where we're going to live, which means another taxpayer who's not paying into taxes. We have had in the past year, as you know, Jeff, a loss in revenue by the state. We are one of 2 states that has suffered a net decline in population.
So for 15 years, we've had a nuclear winter or so. The Democrats took the governor's mansion in 2002. They got control of the state senate in 2002. They had the state house for 2 decades before. So for the last dozen years or more, until Rauner came in, last 2 years, Democrats controlled everything. So when people say, like Mark Brown and other, of our mainstream columnists, Mark's a good guy, I don't mean to pick on Mark, but the mainstream journalists here in town will sort of act as if this is a problem that arose in the last 2 years. But we've been hemorrhaging population, we've been hemorrhaging revenue, we've been hemorrhaging as a state for what? Since it's been a nuclear winter for the last 14 years. Now, Rauner hasn't changed it a lot because he hasn't been able to get reforms. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that's accurate, and let's face it, this Madigan budget and this 32% tax increase does not stop the crisis. It only extends the crisis, and we will be right back in this crisis situation again next spring.
So let's go to that revolution we mentioned at the beginning of the show. We've only got about, 7 or 8 minutes left. The revolution was out with Goldberg, the Kirky, out with Lance Trover, the Kirky, out with Catherine Kelly. People describing this, the Democratic mainstream media said, oh, they were crying in the Rauner administration because they saw how fiercely loyal people were just axed. Grow up. There are no safe spaces in the real world. There may be in college where you exist. They don't know safe spaces. You're going to have 5 or 10 careers at least, and if you're 20-something going forward. And politics is one of the risky occupations. When you win, it's grand. When you're going down the tubes, some people are going to have to go. So this young person, Paul Lisnick, he must know her really well, because I've always heard it was Catherine Kelly. He said Kate. So Paul, he's the guy at CLTV. He kind of drops in Illinois, and sometimes he gets things wrong because he doesn't quite follow us. He's busy doing stuff. Okay, that's CLTV. It's a little side note. So the revolution is out go these people. Brad Hahn, a Topeka person. So the Kirkys, Leslie, and Leslie's fine, but she did have some moderates around there. They brought in like 25 people. It's like, what do these people do, really, if it's going to be a frugal government? And then the Topeka folks, and in come the Policy Institute, in comes Christina Rasmussen as Chief of Staff, in comes Mike Lucci, Policy from Illinois Policy Institute, in comes Diana Rickert in Communications, Laurel Patrick from Scott Walker. It's a revolution, the Beatles song. Hey, what was it? Like the White Album? You folks don't remember what an album is. Do you remember what an album is, Paul? Anyway, so yes, you say you want a revolution, folks, play that song, because now we're going to have a revolution. Now Rauner's going to have reforms are well articulated. So he's not going to, it's great to have Jeannie Ives and Alan Skillicorn behind John Tillman, as he did when he announced his budget solutions back in February, but there may be another dozen or so state reps or state senators who support him. These folks, the believers in the conservative movement and liberty and free markets, that Rich Goldberg wasn't, what Trover wasn't, that Catherine Kelly wasn't, the believers are going to round up those dozen. You know them, Paul, right? They voted against higher taxes. They voted against spending. And he's going to say, come on out. It's like, the guy on the game show says, come on down. He's going to say, come on out of the closet. Let people know what you believe in and start persuading them. That's a revolution, right, Paul?
Well, it's maybe a revolution. It's certainly, I think you will see a much clearer defined policy of reform, which the governor ran on, which I hope and believe will be much more understandable to people so that they can once again understand how these reforms are necessary for their own economic survival.
And to pass these reforms, Paul, he's got to get more Republicans in the State House at least. I don't know if he can get a majority in the Senate, probably not, But right now, it's 67-51 in the State House, 67 Democrats, 51 Republicans. He and Dan Proft and Dick Uihlein and the other parts of the Republican base like Paul Caprio and others, you folks picked up 4 seats. Can you pick up 8 seats in 2018 as well as get Governor Rauner reelected?
Well, what I would say is the 10 who voted against sustaining the governor's veto are now all on an endangered list. I believe several.
How can they find those 10, Paul? We're not going to take the time to list them here. They could go to family-pact.org, right? Your family website?
That's right.
You got those 10 listed there?
We'll have them listed.
Those are, you call them
Yeah.
sellouts or Benedict
Yeah.
Arnolds? Okay, so you can find those 10. What are you going to do? You're going to primary them all?
I think some of them are going to resign because they've broken their campaign promises. I think others will.
What Dan Proft has said, and he's right, it's not just that vote. What that allows, it allows Mike Madigan to turn to his folks and say, vote against the tax increase. Because you're a target, people aren't going to like it, so you vote against the tax increase, and then these Republicans can't say, vote for us because we voted against it, because they voted for it. So that is what Dan Proft says. That is how a minority stays a minority. When you have an issue, Speaker Mike knows how to get a structured vote. He knows how to bring those 10 over to vote for the tax increase. He doesn't want to use his people. He uses the Republicans.
That's correct. That's how we defeated the 09 tax increase. The House Republican caucus remained united. So I think the issue with these people is, why did you make the promises you did? And by the way, I would say to every one of the 10, what reform did you receive from Mike Madigan in return for your vote?
Well, they live in districts that are heavy on universities and state employees and other government workers and prisons. In other words, these institutions say, look, if you vote for this tax increase, we'll help you. Now, you say they didn't get anything. Maybe they did. Not illegal, but it's a trade. The unions might say, we'll help you, although we don't usually. That's not illegal, right?
Well, all those people may be in their district, but I can assure you in all those Republican districts, there are more people who are frustrated taxpayers.
So why didn't they, if they're good politicians?
You're talking about special interest groups. We're talking about taxpayers who pay all the bills.
So if they're going to vote for him, why didn't these people worry about those taxpayers? Because they want to stay elected. Forget principle for a second. You should care about principle. But if they're simply counting votes, why didn't they say, okay, we'll ignore those special interests because we're just for the people? Why didn't they?
Why? Because they bent to the pressure of thinking that the state would go off the cliff. The state wouldn't have gone off the cliff if they had sustained the governor's veto. They would have been back at it the next week, and whatever the governor would have gotten would have been more than what we got now, which would have been better for the state. So
you see what I mean? There's a revolution, folks. It's coming. Katie Bar-the-Boris, not Catherine Kelly, she's gone. Not to me to pick on Catherine, she's a wonderful person, she's fine. But folks, out with the old, in with the new. The ideas are there. Can Rauner do this? Can he be a non-conflicted CEO? Can he lead the state of Illinois? Can he say these are the reforms he wants? Can he persuade other people, state reps, state senators, to join him, to campaign on this, to get a majority in the State House? By the way, next show you'll find out if they get 58 votes, if they get a tie in the State House, what happens? I don't know. The main thing is there's a revolution, and I just want you folks to remember, you come back next week because we will be here. You come back next week and every week to Public Affairs. Thank you so much, Paul Caprio.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for watching. Public Affairs next week and every week.